welcome. Thank you
Hi.
for helping me, just have a conversation about the collaboration between stage managers and intimacy directors. Would you mind introducing yourselves?
Hi, my name is Kimi Handa Brown. I use they, them, theirs pronouns, and I am an intimacy director.
Hi, my name is Leandra Torres. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a stage manager.
Yes. So how do you both know each other?
We worked on a festival with the Makers Ensemble, and the play was called... Autumn's gonna kill me. It's about Adam and Eve.
Okay.
Yeah,
go east.
there you go.
We
Period.
go east.
They know. I've forgotten. No, but yeah, we worked with the amazing and beautiful director Autumn Agilenti. I'm definitely messing up her last name, but
Don't sweat it. All
yeah.
good.
Period. Yeah. So we worked on a festival together last spring. No,
Oh,
fall.
this
No, last spring.
last. It was this year.
Yeah, but it was the spring.
I understand what you're
Yeah. Period. Great.
Can you talk about just your dynamic in the room on like how you worked together to, work on these intimacy scenes? And can you speak more on what the scenes were and like at what point were you hired in the process, etc.?
Yeah.
That's a broad
I
statement
think
there.
it was a bit different because you came in as an actor for Autumn.
Yeah.
And then you wrote in your form that you're an intimacy director.
Yeah. So I submitted, and I was like, love this project, and if I don't get cast, like I'd love to still be involved. And I intimacy direct, especially the content of the show it was kind of a retelling of the Adam and Eve story, and kind of the big thesis was like, what if Adam was the one that bit the apple and had that whole moment, and
that.
exploring the sense of touch and the association of sinfulness when it comes to intimacy. Like that was kind of a really big part of it. And so I read it and was like, oh my God, like that sounds really cool. And so then I submitted, and then I auditioned, and then I also had an interview with the director about my intimacy experience, and we just kind of really hit it off and really were vibing. And then the way that Autumn wanted to work, as she told me, was that she really wanted to like have the intimacy director involved from the start in the collaborative and creation of a lot of ideas, and not just hired on for certain moments and scenes, which I feel like as an intimacy director, I kind of get brought on in, I think like a majority of like 3 different ways. And usually a lot of it is like someone reaches out and they're like, there are these specific moments, we don't have a lot of money, so we're really just gonna call you in and bring you in for these.
Right.
And the one I get the most often is usually people will reach out to me, they're like, again, budget, and we really just have these particular moments. But then I offer, the way that I like to work is I talk with the team, I talk about like community agreements and like kind of expectations of how we like to work, and creating a way to communicate that with everyone. And I like to try and be there from the start, so that we can establish this language and this kind of community accountability and uplifting all the voices, and kind of deconstructing those things and naming them from the start, because I think the beginning of a process is incredibly important.
100%.
And I think it's easier to address potential problems that can happen later when you create a foundation. And so then in processes that I get to be involved in that way, I get to kind of be involved. But then again, I kind of really only come in for the specific moments. But then how it worked with this process was that I was involved from the start. We had like creative discussions, and Autumn would tell me things, and we're very collaborative all together. And we're able to bounce ideas off of each other. And also I got to give my opinions on like other things as well. So I think We Go East was very special in that way, because then even when Leandra was in the room too, I felt creatively, because we were all kind of like multi-hyphenate. So then like Leandra would give like ideas creatively as well. But then when we got to be in the room together, it was very much like, usually what I notice with the stage manager is like, you give the staging, the stage manager is notating and creating like documents in the room, and then able to like have the conversation with me of like, oh, how would you talk about this? Or like, oh, I would run it like this, or like, oh, is this? Or like, oh, we have these different drafts. That was a long-winded statement of how I felt that experience went. So it was really fun. We all got to be really creative in the varying degrees of the process, but it was also a process I really enjoyed because I got to be super involved.
Right.
And establish this language of intimacy, community guidelines, community agreements, and also like community care from the start. And that was really fun.
So
if you have other.
As a stage manager, and this is you'll be able to answer this as well. I'm big on community agreements and culture caretaking, and I try to do that at the beginning of rehearsal as well. You mentioned that as an intimacy director, you do that. Do you approach rehearsals that way? Did you approach rehearsals that way? And if you were, like, how did that collaboration go if community agreements were a part of that production?
Well, I really want to give like my flowers to the director as well, because she really, from the very beginning and early stages of us talking about rehearsals and like what the schedule would look like, she wanted to implement that in every rehearsal, like doing check-ins, making sure everybody's good, like doing that mental check before we even start rehearsals. So that was a conversation she and I had very, very early on before like casting and stuff. So that was implemented in our rehearsals, and usually that's a conversation I have with the director. I don't tend to like be like, let's do this. I would hope that that's what a director would do. Luckily, that's what Autumn implemented in our rehearsal.
Yeah, I think it's a change coming. A lot of directors, at least here, the ones that are being, trained with our generation, whatever statement that is, are trying to implement that as a thing, because it's just good for everybody to feel like that's just the first step of collaborating in the production, is just making sure that we're all on the same page on how we're approaching the process.
Yeah. Can I add?
Absolutely. Add away.
I want to echo that as well, because I think it is a lot of, outside of like the director position, I feel like a lot of add-on positions come in, and it's like when I work on a project, I'll come in and be like, how can I support you as the director? And then the director can then ask me to be as involved in the varying degrees. And so Autumn was like, I want you to be very involved. And so we would like, she had also a really great experience working on a show with an amazing intimacy director, Ancy James.
Yes, I love that.
Already Autumn was like
Yes.
so privy to it, but also like sharing so much of this wisdom and experiences that she had with me, but then also letting the creativity be born from like the people in the room being like, oh, how could we come up with like some sort of drop in? How can we do these things? Or like, oh, what are some things that like we could create in this particular process? Like in the show, there were varying degrees of undress. And so we were like, oh, maybe we can integrate that into like the warm up, where it's like, imagine some sort of layer that you have. And then in this physical warm up, find a time to take the layer off. So then that's you stepping in and tapping in. Like, you know what I mean? We were able to create something like that, which is really cool. And so I notice it's very much like the graciousness of the director to then invite these other positions to then come and meet them. And sometimes there's like time, sometimes there's just a way a director likes to work, and that's just the way a director likes to work, and that's fine. But I get very excited in a process that is kind of like, oh, I think everyone is here for their particular skills, and I'm very excited about the people in the room, and let's meet these people and what we can all do together. I don't know, like there's so many moments when like all of us were able to sit together and have conversations. Like there were fruit involved, so we were like, how could we do these fruits and stuff? And like, just kind of looking at each other and meeting each other there. So that was very cool. But echoing that, I think like the director definitely sets the tone in that way and allows for these processes of like community care, community agreements, and how also to hold that accountable in a space and not just have it done the first day and then absolutely disregard it, and like continuing to show with their actions that they mean it. And so like saying things like I'm always saying, like a consent-based space.
Yes.
And really meaning that in your actions. So like when someone says no, like celebrating that no, because that no is a gift. You know what I mean? Anyway.
Yeah.
No, I agree. I think also once the rehearsal process ended and keeping that momentum, because it's a festival that we did, we were sharing the room with other people once we got in the space. And I had 2 productions that I was a part of. I was stage managing 2 shows. So it was very different shows. So having to keep that momentum with the actors without Kimi and Autumn being there and making sure that they feel comfortable, especially sharing dressing rooms with other people and stuff like that. Like, I just wanted to make sure that that environment that we created in the rehearsal room still continued during tech and continued during our shows.
How did you do that?
Well, I did the what we did in the room, like checking in, making sure that they're feeling okay, making sure that they practice or talked about those things that you implemented in those kissing moments with each other, seeing if they needed anything. We were a prop heavy show, so that was also something that I needed to make sure that they felt good about. Stuff like that, yeah.
Can you give me an example of like one scene or one moment that you had to work on? And how did you approach it? And then how did you take notes of the blocking? Because it is significantly different blocking than picks up the cup, puts it on table, stage right. I think, can we talk a little bit about that?
Do you have a scene? I was thinking about, what scene were you thinking about?
When they're laying down on the ground, is that what you're talking about? The first, like,
oh yeah, we can talk about the first one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, what were you thinking?
I was thinking about the one with the water towards the end that we never really got to get to.
Yeah.
But I just liked we can talk about the first one because that's the one we like. I forgot that.
We worked a lot on that one.
There was one moment we worked a lot, but we had to cut it because our thing was too long.
Yeah.
So we had to
the water one we had to cut.
Yeah. But I was very excited about that one. I dreamt upon it. So what ends up kind of happening is I will like have a discussion with the director and I'll be like, what does this moment mean to you? What are some things you'd like to see? What are some exciting moments in this moment of intimacy? Because then all I really get is the stage direction and the text. And so then I want to hear what the director thinks. And so then the director was like, oh, I'm really interested in like this specific stage direction. I'm very interested in like these shapes and these tableaus and again, these core themes, because I also think intimacy, you need to have a core, and any artistic thing, you need to have some sort of core theme so your choices are constantly being tied back into your core theme to like make sense of it and to give it some sort of root. And so I think with intimacy, it needs that like, okay, this can have a really fun moment, but like it always has to kind of tie into like what we're trying to say, or even if it's like disregarding what you're trying to say, you know, but it's tying into that theme. And so then I have a conversation of like what that moment ties into, what is like the underlying feelings, experiences, etc. And then I can like drum up some ideas, or we like take some time from each other. I come up with some drafts, and then before the rehearsal, I share those ideas with the director. And then there's a couple ways to approach it in the room, where my favorite is like I have these drafts and then we kind of start, but then it is kind of collaborative where it's like, oh, like what if they did this? Or like, oh, that's interesting, but I'm really excited about this instinct. And like, because then also there's that sense of like it is directing, but it's also like so intimate. So also like hearing how the actors feel, or like I have something in my head and then you try and put it on a body and you're like, bodies don't move like that, but in my head they move like that. And so creating that open air to also voice those opinions, voice those experiences, voice those like little ouchies, to be able to kind of pivot and know that it's not personal, but also like what is effective in storytelling, and also like what can a body do more often. So with all that in mind, I come up with some ideas, I come in, and then we start staging it on the bodies. And then if it's reading to the director, then that's great. Sometimes the director's like, ooh, actually, like you did this one thing, and like maybe we can like make that longer. Like, oh, I'd love to see more of that shape. And I try to be as explicit and very like literal with my staging. I did a lot of training with TIE, Theatrical Intimacy Education, which is great because a lot of people are familiar with that language. And so I try to make it as explicit while I'm talking to the actors and while I'm talking in the room. So hopefully notating becomes, but it is like a lot of extra words when you're like, oh, I'm just watching these people hold hands. But it's like on this line, you'll then extend your right arm, and your right arm will then like put the energy through your fingers. And so then said other person will close the distance, and then you'll make contact, and we'll have like a skin level touch. Like I'll try and use these words.
Yeah, and all of that is extremely useful because you can, it's easily maintainable, sustainable, and you can remember it quickly. Even like in tech when you're like,
but also like, I'm sorry, like also the counting was very helpful for me. Like I feel like we had a cue where the sound had to pull their kissing. So I needed to make sure it wasn't more than whatever you guys had already established.
literally like a choreography.
Yeah, exactly. So that was really helpful. I was really paying attention to how you would have them move with their hands and how they would like the movement with their hands and their face was really important, because we had to establish when they were going to touch each other's faces, as well as like when they were going to kiss. So I think that I had to really pay attention to how Kimi would tell them what to do, and like I would annotate the scene and then the numbers of how long it would be. So that's how it worked better in my brain. I hope that made sense.
Did having Kimi in the process of this show, it's hard, I feel like this is going to be a hard question because it's hard to imagine the process without them, but having them in the show, did you feel supported? How
Oh,
was that
100%.
having that person focused on this with the vocabulary, the language, the tools help
Yeah.
you focus better on the macro, which PSMs do, stage managers do?
Yeah, I think it was extremely helpful because there was so much intimacy in the show. Even when it wasn't touching, I feel like there was intimacy.
Can you explain what that means in
okay.
terms of like intimacy that isn't touching?
Yeah,
An example. Of the
damn,
show.
yeah, I'm trying to think. The way that they would look at each other, I feel like we talked a lot about what.
Some iography.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Biography, okay.
Yeah, there was a lot of that towards the end, like when the play is basically like, okay, it gives a question mark of like the world is about to end and whose fault really is it, and they're kind of looking at each other and they're having this really in-depth like moment at each other, and then it goes black. So like that moment, and even that was counted as well, right? And then it went black.
So like eye contact, physical touch, nudity, partial nudity. That was also a part of the production.
Yes.
I think there's also like I'm hoping that people kind of expand what intimacy like means to them as well, where intimacy for me is not just like literal sex on stage, which of course that is like the most mainstream version of like intimacy on stage, but I feel like I always consider theater and like art in general as just like innately intimate, like to have bodies in a space, and that's like a language I'll try and use too, where it's like it's such a gift that people are offering themselves and their bodies in their fullness to create something at the use of their body and their energy and their mind that is already so vulnerable and so intimate.
100%.
And you can tell like when you're watching a show when people are open and closed off to that, you know? And so that already is like a very intimate thing. So having these practices, whether or not there's like kissing on stage, but then also intimacy of like the content you talk about, because I also do a lot of intimacy directing of like trauma-based content, and also like racial violence and violence in general. And I think there is this sense of intimacy that is these relationships, is this content, and like being together with people in a space, or even just like I intimacy directed something where like it was a very healthy couple, but even then like there were some moments where it's like, let's build this in, and like, oh, now you get a little sad, and like la la la. And so the play had a lot of moments like it was someone physically becoming like born and into existence from the start. And so we asked them to do some like kind of goofy things. And even comedy too is so vulnerable as well. And so it's this human in underwear like screaming and pretending to like feel themselves and all these things. And it's like, it's really lovely when you have an actor that is very comfortable and like feels safe and all these things. But then even that too is like, thank you for doing that, because it is so scary and emotional, and I don't know, like costumes is very vulnerable. There's just so much vulnerability in theater that I think like creating this container of like, how can we develop safety and like excitement in the creative process when it is you that is being involved in it, you know?
And I feel like it's normal for actors to be game to do anything. Which
Whether
is
they want to or not.
Exactly. They're like,
what I mean?
they just like, I need to give it my all no matter what. And so I think it's very helpful to have people like us in the group to just be like, but are you okay?
Right.
For real? And also if you're not, let's talk through what that means and like what tools we can give you.
Because it's actually so cool to like not be game for things.
Yeah,
and
it's
not
so
in like
fair. And things can be adjusted. It's theater at the end of the day.
Yeah. Like I always tell people this too. I'm like, if your actor doesn't want to be on their knees and you've somehow imagined this show where they're on their knees for 30 minutes straight, and you did not tell them ahead of time before they accepted the role and they can't do it, and your show you think is falling apart, I think your show wasn't that strong to start, you know? Like there's already a hole in it, and you can still find the support for that theme, that visual, that thing you're doing, and not at the cost of a person. Because at the end of the day, it's theater, and suddenly this person's like, oh, my knees are busted forever because I did the show. Like, that's so not worth it. We're here to like have a silly, goofy time.
Yeah.
And through the silly, goofy time, we can sometimes talk about some sad things, and we can like get really serious and get really absurd. But if we're not supporting the people that are doing that, we're just like hurting humans, you know?
Yeah. And James came to speak a couple times to us, and
she's cool.
#1 fan. They mentioned the phrase brave space, and I have kept that with me since, because safe space, yes, but the brave part, the courage of just being game for doing things and not doing things, and just having the just bravery of saying no.
Yeah.
Or can we do it this way? And just like, I feel like that opens the space for collaboration.
Yeah.
I'm gonna switch it up a little bit now. Have you both worked on shows that have intimate moments, whatever that means, without an intimacy director? If so, can you talk about how that went? As an actor, as a director, as an actor, as an intimacy director, as a stage manager, multifaceted people here. If you haven't, it's fine.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, because I worked.
Recently on a musical, and the writer was an intimacy director. So she came, she was like, the director, like, this was a little crazy, out of nowhere was like, I want to put kissing. And we were like,
But why? Valid question. Will the play be enhanced with this kiss? Which is something that I ask myself all the time. People just have like,
I mean, I feel like,
yeah.
well, it was a lesbian pirate musical.
Still, why?
No, I'm just, no, you're right. The director felt as if it would enhance the song by the end if they kissed.
Okay.
It was the last song too, so like it was
Okay.
like the end, cute. There's two kisses actually, so it was two moments. So it was when one of the characters realized that she was gay, and then at the end when they finally were together, and the director felt that they should kiss, and it was already like, it wasn't talked about. So then we did a check-in. We had to do a check-in with both actors and acts, and if they felt comfortable implementing this kiss, because it was never talked about from the get-go. They were both game.
Great.
And then the writer and the composer was the intimacy director.
Okay.
But that was very like, whoo, we're doing this.
Was the question of, but really, are you sure?
Yeah.
Like-
I mean, I talked to them separately
Okay.
after the director talked to them.
Great.
Because I just wanted to check in and make sure that they felt good about it. And they were both like, yeah, we feel good. That was very different than this process.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. What about you?
Oh, I've had so many experiences where there is no intimacy person, because I also like am an actor.
Right.
So I've done a lot of acting things, and I have been in so many experiences where like I just get grabbed or touched, or like I'm put in a situation and I'm telling a story that I don't know that I'm telling, and it's for the point of something else. And I think also to be this bitch.
You're so fine. Keep going. You're so
Sorry,
fine.
I said it. Sorry, everyone. As like a non-binary Asian American person who has femininity in their existence, I am often sexualized in a space, whether or not it's even a sexual space.
Yep.
And especially in theatrical art. So I think it's something that I'm always inclined to notice and in tune to, and looking back at a lot of my experiences is why I was put in the situations that I was put in, why I was touched and not asked, and all these things. So when I found out about intimacy directing, I was like, whoa, that's so cool. You can say no, you can do these things. And so now when I am in a space, and I think also like learning to have a conversation, learning that like the people pleasing mentality actually only really benefits the people trying to take advantage of you.
Right.
I think understanding a lot of those things now that when I'm in a space and there's no person that is being the intimacy director or conscious of that language, I am now that person. But it's harder in those dynamics. Like when I'm an actor, there is a lot less opportunities for me to speak up.
Yeah.
And I did this cuckoo bananas musical reading, and the director was cuckoo bananas, and he was asking me to do the craziest things and said it in the craziest way
Oh my God.
to so many times. And I kind of was like, okay, how can I, like, because then I'd be like, why? Like, why do you want me to
Right.
do this? It's a reading. I feel like you're asking me to do some really weird things. He was like, oh, because it's funny. It's because it's this. And I was like, well, I'm funny. I can be funny without doing those things, and I'll show
Right.
him, and I'll make funny choices. And then he kept being like, I still want to see this, this, this. And I was like, well, I don't want to do that until we've talked about it. And I don't want to do it until you tell me exactly the shapes. He was like, can't you just figure it out? And I was like, not in my free time. I'm going to figure it out right now in rehearsal. And me like 4 years ago would not have done that. But then me in the moment, I was like, fine. And I looked at the other person. I was like, how about you maybe, this is a shape that I'm thinking about. You put your arm over my shoulder. How do we feel about that? Okay, we like that. Great, we're going to do that. And, you know, I had to like truly intimacy direct myself, which is so uncomfortable. Or I think this also happens a lot when I'm now in a space and there is no intimacy director, but they know I have done intimacy directing. I am then suddenly like, hey, like, what do you think? And I go, it's not my job right now. But then I'll be like, but also we should be talking like this and we should be doing this. And so I have to do a lot of like self-intimacy conversations. And it's a bummer in a sense that it's great that people want the language and they get really excited when they know that I am an intimacy director. But then I also find it frustrating because then as I think we can know how exciting and it alleviates so much pressure when there is an intimacy director and there's no crisscross of
100%.
hats in the space,
Yes.
I then have to put on those other hats. And then it's also weird too because then I'm like, yes, this person has to kiss me. Okay, let's talk about this kiss. And then suddenly I'm like, well, now I'm the fucking weirdo. My God.
You're so fine.
Anyway, I'm the weirdo that does that. And I think I want to see more people in the space have that consciousness.
Yes.
And not just bank on like the one singular person that has like taken one workshop. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think for us here, we've taken a workshop. I've taken a workshop.
Yeah.
And I am an advocate for like educating ourselves and just
Yeah.
I feel like anybody who does theater should learn how to do everything, so that you can know how to communicate, so that you know what expectations to set for yourself in the collaboration. But I do think that, you know, it's okay to wear multiple hats, you know. I wear multiple hats all the time.
Yeah.
But it's also like, I feel like when you're focused on one thing, you can just, you know, like you just put all your eggs in that basket, you put all your energy to it, and I think it's great. And for stage managers, that's hard, because we have to focus on everything.
Yeah.
But I think, at least for me, it would alleviate a lot to just have the person, and like even after opening, when everybody's out and it's just the associates and us who like come and check the show, knowing that I have a person to be like, hey, this happened, help me.
Yes.
Or what, like building scenarios where it's like, this is the main choreography, but can we have a plan B in case someone doesn't feel like
I
it
love a
one
plan
day?
B. Yeah.
Or injuries and stuff like that. When going back to the statement of intimacy can be, it's not just sex or nudity, I think about like neurodivergent people in in like the company, or people with physical disabilities who like don't like to be touched in certain areas because it just like triggers them, which I experienced. I think that not necessarily an intimacy director is needed for that, but the tools of the community agreements, the checking in, the just all of that, I think it's helpful to build the cultural caretaking that we need for the people to take care of each other. I remember like the red, green, yellow.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, what are you feeling today? And my actors would be like, this is red. Do not touch my face today. I just don't want it. And I feel like that comes from intimacy direction.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, that's like an IDC terminology.
Yeah.
And it's so effective. And I think that's kind of, I don't know. I feel like that intimacy mindset is always so great, especially with starting a process and offering language to people, because it's really just a methodology and a technique into how to communicate in a very depersonalized but incredibly effective and clear way to then create something that is so unclear. It's kind of like, I really like the phrase that like Elizabeth Gilbert uses of like demystifying the magic. And I think with intimacy and theater, a lot of the time people think the magic is in how did it happen? I have no idea. And like the spontaneity of it all, especially with intimacy, people always try to convince me that it's the spontaneous that makes the intimacy so great. And I have to convince them where I'm like, well, actually it's the actor's job to make it look spontaneous. But it's like, if you have, it is choreography and it's musical and it's a science, because if you had dancers do a lift just in the moment spontaneously, like someone's going to get hurt, it's not going to look as clean, all these things. But you don't get mad at that dancer for knowing every time on beat 4 they're going to plie so that someone can pick them up, like, you know what I mean? And they figure out how to motivate that every single night, and it looks incredible. And it's the same thing with intimacy, and it's the same thing with like the content that you create in a story, and like the actors and what they bring to the story, because even outside of the explicit intimacy choreography, there are these moments of like, how do we talk to each other? How do we create this level of effectiveness in our communication when we all come from different perspectives, when we all come from different backgrounds? And I think there's so much to dismantle and there's so much to deconstruct when it comes to theater of like the white supremacy, the racism, the transphobia, the ableism too, by having this level of very technical language of like, what are your access needs for the day? And making them, because it's already a hurdle for someone to have to ask for what they need, you know, especially when certain bodies, especially like the actor in the room, are really conditioned to not ask for what they need and to ask for what they want. And it's really not encouraged. Even if you're the coolest director and you're like, hey bros, like I'm super, super cool. Like tell me everything. Tell me all your personal problems. And I also am a very big advocate of, I don't need to know your personal problems, but I do need to know how to make you the most effective you in this moment.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't need to give me the sob story about how you hurt your ankle, but if you tell me that you hurt your ankle, I will just believe you and I will be like, oh, how can we support you? You need a brace?
Yeah.
Can we ask stage management for, you know, and then you don't need, I don't know, like there's so much justification that comes with like accessing your needs, but then with like these community agreements, this community care that you establish from the beginning and having that language, it's like you lay, and I think a lot of the time people think it's so much work, it's a waste of time. It's like, oh, you're making problems before the problems even occur. But I think by just like talking about it all and laying it all out.
Clinical terms help because it's like, you know how actors fall in love all the time on set and like
the
they
time.
confuse, and it's just like, I feel like sometimes you're saying you're puckering up. Like,
Yeah.
that's all you're doing.
Yeah.
It's nothing more than that.
Yeah.
It's like just so much, it's just.
And it's also like, I always say this, I say this all the time. Our brains are so amazing, but our brains are also so dumb. Like they don't know the difference between make pretend in real life. Like they just don't know. And so acknowledging that as well, where it's like our job is to tell a convincing story and convince our bodies to do this. So of course, if you're buddy with someone on stage, your body's going to react. And there are ways to like prevent these reactions by like, to shame you and to make you feel self-conscious. Like, you know, anatomy is anatomy and bodies are bodies. Like they will just respond and like, and your brain's gonna release all the endorphins, gonna release all the things, because like that's what happens when you touch someone. That's what happens when you have a moment when you're falling in love, when you're singing with someone. Like it's so natural. And like, if we want someone to really fully offer themselves, we should give them the safety and the benefit of the doubt that they are doing their job. At the end of the day, like we are asked and hired to do a job. So how can we just do that? Like no one is mean to me if I was an accountant and I was like having a bad day, but no, I know I do my numbers and then I go home, but then suddenly you're an actor and you're not like super presentable. You don't have your hair done. You don't have your makeup done. You don't have the best energy coming in, but you're still, you know your lines. You're not being mean in the room, but maybe on your break you like sit by yourself and suddenly that person is vilified and being like, oh, that person's so mean. That person's so mean. It's like, no, we're here to do a job. And so it's the same thing of like the tools you offer to like, oh, Sandy doesn't want to give me a hug. Sandy hates me. You don't know Sandy's deal, but Sandy is trying to do their best in the show. And maybe Sandy really has a lot of boundaries when it comes to being hugged. And that doesn't mean that they're not allowed to do theater. But again, I also think the precepts, I always talk about, now I'm like getting really excited, but the precepts of like, even in an audition, listing out the things that you expect your actors to do, because then no one like, this is an example too, like the difference between being Sally Bowles in Cabaret versus being Sally Bowles in an all nude production of Cabaret.
Oh, 100%.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd love to be Sally Bowles. I don't want to be naked all the time.
Exactly.
And if I knew that, but then getting mad at the actor for saying yes to their dream role and then
Without
being asked to
knowing.
do that, that sucks. And then that makes the actor feel, that makes everyone feel bad. And it's like, there is someone that's going to be cool with being all nude. There is going to be someone that's going to do exactly what you want as a director and in your production, but you have to be really upfront with that. Even with like dating, with how you experience your relationships too. And it's hard. Language is hard, which is why I think intimacy is so great, because it's a way to just find the words.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned auditions, because I interviewed the casting agent for Slave Play. And in the the first episode I filmed, we talked about how important it is, or how useful it is, to just have an intimacy director help with casting notices or just be in the room, because actors, again, they're a game. There was a stage direction, not in Slave Play, but just another show, where it says the character takes off bra underneath shirt, and actor went in audition, took off the bra.
Wow.
Maybe it may be helpful to, like, you know, you don't have to do the stage directions, or the specific side, that stage direction you can ignore.
Right.
Like, don't feel like those things should be.
Yeah.
included in casting notices, and you just mentioned it perfectly. I even think with, this is not intimacy related, but I feel like Hamilton, tattoos. If an actor has tattoos, like, they're asked to cover that because it's the look that Hamilton has, and like they know in advance the casting notice says it. And I think small things like that are so important.
Yeah.
I'm gonna wrap up with one last question. What do you need from each other to make the process as effective and as brave as possible?
I would.
You can talk specifically about the role, or you can talk about each other because you did work with each other. But just to help out, you can like separate yourself from Kimi.
I guess, and I don't only think that this applies with intimacy directors. I think it applies with anybody you're collaborating with. I think communication and trust is really important.
Yes.
Specifically because I have to trust in what Kimi's doing and what they are establishing in the room, and me be able to continue that, and they have to trust in me for me to be able to do that. So I think that that's really vital, and just really clear and then also clear communication, because I don't want to misunderstand what they're doing in the room and then me do something completely different.
100%.
I need to keep that momentum that we've established in the room the entire run of the show.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel.
Awesome.
Yeah, I super echo that. I also think, like, at least in previous experiences too, something that I always hope from with a stage manager is the honoring of like what I've created. I think, and this is something I'm still personally trying to sort out with intimacy directing, because I want it to be consent based, and we want it to be like meet your body where your body is in the day. But at the end of the day, it's still choreography. It's still set. And once it's set, it's set. And I find with intimacy, a lot of the time, like, actors really love to be swayed in the moment.
Yep.
And what I so appreciate in a stage manager is like running the intimacy call and really like holding actors accountable in like the way that they are doing it.
Yeah.
And like in We Go East, I was like, oh yeah, Leandra is like, got it. Like Leandra's gonna make sure that they're doing the counts. And then I watch the show and I go, they did. You know what I mean? Like, they're doing it. And then, of course, like, there are moments of shifting. And, like, it doesn't have to be, like, exact. But there are moments when you watch it and you go, that's different.
Yeah.
That is different. And trusting that a stage manager is also as passionate about the show that has been created collaboratively and maintaining that.
Yeah.
You know, it's the maintenance of it and having that trust that, like, I know they'll come to me with something, or I'll go to them with something, and like I can trust that the stage manager also is supporting the integrity of like what I've created
100%.
as well, which is a big gift to be able to go to stage management, or even like have those moments with stage managers and be like, the actors are not wanting to do what I need them to do. Can you help me with that? And stage management being like, yep, got it. You know, and you're like super sick. You know?
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's amazing. This was a lovely conversation. Thank you both so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, I look forward to working together sometime soon, hanging out or whatever. I think it would be amazing.